1 year ago today, I was standing in a very different place than where I am now. At exactly this time last year, I was in the middle of a war zone. I was working in the largest displaced persons camp in South Sudan. With a population of over 100,000 people, Bentu camp wasn't just the largest in South Sudan, it was one of the largest in the world. And there was a day in that camp that I will never forget. I was managing a malnutrition center in the middle of the camp, and in front of me, there stood a woman. She was wearing a tattered red dress, her bare feet covered in mud, and in her arms, she held a small bundle. As I approached her, she unwrapped the bundle to reveal a tiny 2-year-old boy. It was the worst case of malnutrition that I'd seen in my entire career. And I knew right away that the case was too severe to treat there at our malnutrition center. So I decided to take them to the Doctors Without Borders hospital on the other edge of the camp. And on the way there, that woman told me her story. She had spent 10 days walking through the swamps of South Sudan, escaping the brutal civil war that had engulfed her country. She had braved crocodiles, hidden from soldiers, and had eaten nothing but water lilies to stay alive for those 10 days. But as we got to the hospital, something strange happened. All of a sudden, this woman, this brave mother that had carried her child to safety, and now we were almost there, she told us she didn't want to stay at the hospital. The nurses and I argued with her. We pleaded, and still she told us that she wanted to go. Finally, we persuaded her to stay. And as I left that hospital, I felt a small sense of victory. But it was short-lived. My colleague was with me, a member of our local staff, and he turned to me, and without meeting my eyes, he said, "I think the reason she didn't want to stay at the hospital is because she had other children in her shelter back at the camp, and she didn't want to leave them alone for the whole night." My heart sank. I had traveled across the world to be there, spent almost 5 years working in humanitarian aid, and I had just convinced this woman to stay at the hospital, potentially putting her other children in danger. Suddenly, I began to question everything. And that night, sitting in the humanitarian hub on the edge of the camp, I asked myself, how did I end up here? Well, that begins with my own story as a 7-year-old refugee coming to the United States from the former Soviet Union. I was terrified. I didn't speak a word of English, and according to this article, that's me right there, I didn't speak a word of Russian either because I was in too much shock. My family had come with nothing, and through the kindness of the community, we were resettled, housed, and built an incredible new life. And as I got older, I began to ask myself, why me? Why was I so fortunate? Why did I get to have these opportunities, like an incredible education and access to healthcare? And I didn't have all of the answers, and I still don't. But what I did come to realize is that I feel I have a sense of responsibility to give back. And for me, after 3 months spent in India during college, that meant giving back in some of the most marginalized places on the planet. I decided to pursue my dream. I became passionate about health and nutrition, became a registered dietitian, obtained my master's in public health, and then I was ready to save the world. Well, saving the world ended up being a little bit more complex than I'd initially envisioned. And it was during my first sojourn into the world of humanitarian aid that I really came to see this. I was working in Geneva, Switzerland, with an NGO, a non-governmental organization, on HIV/AIDS policy issues. And though the work was fascinating, I still felt removed from the issues on the ground. I wanted to see with my own eyes, to understand the root causes of the poverty, malnutrition, and health disparities that are still so pervasive in our world today. So I decided to go to Africa. Initially, I worked in Gabon at the Albert Schweitzer Hospital, alongside medical doctors and researchers fighting malaria and treating malnutrition. That's me with some of the nurses at the hospital. In Ethiopia, I learned about chronic food insecurity and the effect that climate change is having on indigenous populations. There are now an estimated 36 million climate refugees around the world, and that number is only projected to drastically increase in the coming decades. In Darfur, I spent 2 years working on programs for the treatment and prevention of severe acute malnutrition in children and women. You know, it's interesting. In the field of humanitarian aid, as you work your way up, you often go into a tougher situation. I was thinking about it, and in the corporate world, as you climb the ladder, get promoted, you may get that corner office with a nice view. In the humanitarian world, as you work your way up, you may go into a more difficult situation. You might go from working in a peaceful village in Ethiopia to a war zone in South Sudan. This was the view from my corner office. I was living in a shared shipping container, had a grab bag ready to go in case of an emergency evacuation, and that was my commute to work. Although I have to say, there were days when the commute was a little bit more exciting. As I got further and further along in my career, I began to see how interconnected we are, interdependent, and that this global interdependence is a fact of life, one which can either be an intimidating prospect or a cause for hope. And I also began to see the power that we each possess to make an impact. And I'd like to share with you the 3 things that I've learned that are key to making an impact. The first is to believe. Believe in your ability to make a difference. Right now, in this particular moment, we have an unprecedented opportunity to affect change because of all of the resources and technology at our fingertips. And because of these resources and technology, you don't have to go to the other side of the world to affect that change. After 5 years in Africa, I decided to come back home and launch my own nutrition practice, to integrate all of the lessons I've learned and help improve the health and nutrition of people here. Something else that can help you believe is to find heroes who inspire you. Like Malala Yousafzai, who at 19 is fighting for girls' right to an education around the world. Or Ron Finley, right here in Los Angeles, who's promoting urban gardens and encouraging people to reclaim their health. The next is passion. Pick a passion. You can't fix everything, but you can choose one thing, one cause, or one organization that sets your heart on fire. There are currently 1.5 million NGOs in the US alone, so chances are there's one that's perfect for you. And there you'll meet other people who share that common passion, and together you could make a tremendous difference. Often, it is that to which we feel a deep emotional connection that can lead us to the area where we're meant to make an impact. My personal experience as a refugee led me to my passion. What is it in your personal story that'll lead you to yours? And last but most important, take action. For without action, passion is just a dream. It is during the leap from passion to action that we become our best selves. We learn by taking action. And though we will make mistakes, it is in this space that we will be humbled and transformed. You may have heard of the butterfly effect. Chaos theory states that if a butterfly flaps its wings on one side of the world, it can cause a chain reaction that could lead to a cyclone on the other side. What is the chain reaction that your actions will create? I believe that we each have a role to play and a responsibility to create a more humane and peaceful world. And my question to you is, what is your role?